Okay, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Laurent Schmidt. I'm the Secretary General of ENTSO-E. Very happy to welcome you today on a series of webinar whose purpose is to introduce some heavy work which we did over the last 2 years together with the best 30 experts from our TSO community on working out on a vision for 2030 on how we see the European power system evolving in the context of the EU Green Deal. So we have today of speaker. I'm going to introduce very briefly the few housekeeping rules. So first of all, you're going to see basically and hear people who are speaking. So the people who speak activate camera and their audio, and the other should mute in the meantime. Your question, of course, the purpose of the webinar is to encourage feedback and participation and hear the view of our stakeholders regarding this vision. So we have, in the meantime, also set up a Slido site where you can, in parallel to GoToWebinar, where you can indicate your name, company, and raise your question. And as moderator, I will bring the most popular question to our speakers and our panelists through the events. So don't use the chat into the GoToMeeting, but use directly the Slido. Okay, so without, I'm going to now go to the first speaker. So we are very happy to have with us, so you see here the detail of Slido, to have with us today Joachim Balke, the head of Unit B1 Network and Regional Initiative from DG ENER. And Joachim is planning to introduce the Commission's vision on the Green Deal and the pathways to deliver on the European long-term ambitions. So Joachim, the floor is yours. I hope everything is working on your side. I'm not sure Joachim has already connected. So maybe what we can do, because Joachim did not show up in the first part of the preparation phase, maybe we could start and switch to the second keynote, who I know is already connected. So Morten Peterson, we are very happy to have today with us the Vice Chair of the E-Trade Committee, who is going to introduce to us the key milestone on the path to climate neutrality. So Morten, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. I hope I'm coming through. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Good. You never know in these crazy days and times. I've been based in Copenhagen since March and haven't been to Brussels at all. So I'm working from home and staring in my iPad for like 10, 12 hours every day. But you know the sensation, I guess. Thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. I've been looking very much forward to it, because obviously, even though the COVID is affecting all kinds of work and life in the most unfortunate way, I mean, work carries on and should carry on. So I think it's so timely with this webinar, and looking very much forward to participate in it. Now, if I may start from the outside, I was at the COP in Madrid before Christmas, and which was a very sad experience. And the big picture, it was very clearly felt the impact from the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. It was very widely felt how uncertain things are in the climate diplomacy, given that the US is pulling out, the Chinese are coming forward, India, South Africa, all other major powers having their own interests, Brazil in all this. So this leads me to say that the European Union, with the Green Deal, really has a major opportunity to take leadership in in combating climate change. And this is so important to do, given what's happening all around the world. So even though Madrid was a sad outcome, I think it's so important that the EU takes upon itself the leadership, which I think it has done in the Green Deal. I'll get back to this. And also in the big picture, the elections in 2019 were for sure green elections, and this has already made an impact on the work in the European Parliament. We're just coming out of a plenary week, and as you know, we had the discussions on the climate law, eventually agreeing on a 60% emissions reduction target for 2030, which was extremely important, but which also has some implications on the workings of Parliament. So I've just got to provide some reflections on some of the institutional issues, not least from European Parliament perspective, and this might be very Brussels bubble-like, but still important in terms of moving things forward. So I think the climate law that we adopted also clearly shows the challenges that we're going to face within the European Parliament in the months and years to come, because we have a very basic challenge in ensuring that we get people on board in this green transition. And I'm a big fan of the Green Deal. I think it's very visionary. I think it's very ambitious, and I think basically the ambition of trying to move entire economies, and in this case an entire continent, ahead or forward in terms of green ambitions is very inspiring, and we have to do our utmost in the European Parliament in order to ensure that we can actually adopt and legislate on these extremely sensitive and difficult issues. And the climate law was a step in the right direction, but also having to bear in mind that we have to have also, or hopefully all political groups on board on this. And on the very short term, clearly we have challenges when it comes to realizing the green ambitions in terms of budget as well. And as you know, we have serious fights on the MFF on the budget. First of all, it's a rule of law discussion and issue right now, but clearly it has implications for all green issues and will have. But also as some sort of example or proof of the dominance of green issues is the fact that the green issues and Green Deal is so centrally located within the recovery package, within the budget discussions, and stronger than I feared back in March, where you had voices out there saying that, okay, forget about the green stuff. Now it's all Corona crisis and combating unemployment, etc., etc. But still, and despite this, we have the green issues very centrally located in the entire exercise, which gives some room for optimism on my behalf. So solving the budget issues in the very near term, short term, of course, of vital importance in order to get the Green Deal moving and having the implications in the right place, for example, on the just transition mechanism and all these issues as well. So budget is a big issue. On a broader scale, they're not in my backyard issue. Will come to haunt us, just emphasizing that we need to have people on board in order to further accelerate the uptake of renewables in our energy system. So not in my backyard is going to be a major challenge for us to deal with. Just emphasizing further the point of getting there where people and the electorate sees this transition as being advantage in many ways. And this is clearly an issue that we will deal with from Parliament's side, have to deal with in the years to come. And generally speaking, I think the general vision in the Green Deal is extremely interesting. I mean, we'll have the renovation wave coming up shortly, thereby combating unemployment as well as combating greenhouse gas emission is a fantastic perspective on this that we have to ensure that we get right. The offshore strategy coming up soon. And I think in these policy discussions, it's going to be so interesting to see all these new hybrid models coming up and forward. And from a policymaker perspective, how do we get this right, ensuring that we have the right regulatory regime when seeing new models in terms of tenders, hybrid models, and all these very technical issues that you guys are experts in. But we have to get this right if we are to deploy renewables on the North Sea or wherever to the scale that we actually want. So this is going to be extremely exciting and new territory for all of us, new territory for Commission, for European Parliament, for member states, for stakeholders like yourself. So extremely interesting stuff coming up. Sector coupling, which is so important in order to take the next steps in realizing Green Deal. Extremely technical and complicated, and to a certain extent quite uncertain as to what is it that we're going to legislate about, because everybody wants to do sector coupling. Problem, challenge being, okay, what then? How do we do it? So all this to say, I think there are so many extremely good initiatives in the Green Deal. And from Parliament's side, we're going to be extremely busy, obviously, when we see all the legislation on the table. We're not quite there yet, but over the next 6-12 months, we'll go into to ramp up the Parliament's work on all these extremely important files. So I'm quite enthusiastic and optimistic in terms of getting to work on all these files. I think to a large extent the European Parliament is ready to take upon itself this work, but I'm also quite curious to see how we will deal with this, because we will be in a phase in a year's time, 2 years' time, where there'll be so much on the table in the European Parliament that we have to cope with all these 47 legislative acts, or how many it is in Green Deal. And this is, from an institutional point of view, going to be extremely challenging to get it right, given the huge amount of work on the table. But this we have to deal with and have to do it in the right way. Just a final word. I think apart from all these new interesting policy initiatives that are so exciting, and it's going to be so much fun and hard work to do, I think we have a serious issue on the issue of implementation that we have to look at the same time. I think we see a lot of issues where we lack implementation from member states submitting their NECPs to. I mean, this afternoon in the ITRE committee, we'll have a discussion on the Energy Efficiency Directive. I think half of member states have complied or submitted their plans or something like that. So we'll clearly have and will have a discussion on implementation. So one thing is Green Deal, all the exciting new initiatives, and we love to do new stuff from Parliament's side, but we also have to have a keen eye on implementation in the years to come. So, and let me wrap up by saying, Laurent, that Parliament is ready. We're really looking forward to getting down to work on all these exciting new initiatives and legislative acts. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm really looking forward to this webinar, and thank you again for inviting me. Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Morten. I hope you can hear me. Very enlightening opening. We are in our TSO community very excited by this new target of the Green Deal, and we're working very hard in analyzing what are the impacts on the power system particularly, and how it needs to transform on topics such as you mentioned, the offshore wind as an example, but also others such as the one related to the introduction of hydrogen in connection and in relation with renewable electricity, which gets produced into the system. Maybe do you have a final comment on recommendation on where you think TSOs should particularly focus moving forward? And
I'd say for one thing, from like a policymaker's perspective, it's extremely important that the TSOs play an active part in this and provide us with opinions and technical advice on which is the right way to go. So I think coming up with examples or solutions to the issues that we face commonly is going to be extremely important. So I'd say in general, for all stakeholders in this entire Green Deal and agenda, coming up with constructive solutions to the issues that we face would be extremely valuable, seen from a policymaker perspective.
Okay, thank you. So we are going
Thank
to,
you.
and all the best for your next hearing in the E-Tray on these very important topics. We are going to switch now to the next speaker. I hope he's now connected. Joachim, are you connected? Are you able to talk?
Yes, hello, good morning, Laurent. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, and apologies for joining late and only by phone. Our corporate devices are quite sort of selective in terms of the applications that they accept. But I'm very grateful for the occasion here to replace Katharina, actually, as it were, and say a few words by way of introduction from our side on the challenges brought about by the pathway, as you mentioned in the title, to 2050, but also in particular on the intermediate steps and trajectory that we have to take to get there. And I think it's extremely timely and appropriate that you, as the TSO community, should discuss that, because undoubtedly you will have a very central role in making that happen and in enabling that acceleration. Because if there's one thing to say about the climate target plan, which is now sort of the let's say the buzzword because it's our latest publication, then I think it's really that it's all about acceleration and front loading of efforts to a certain extent. That is really the order of the day, considered necessary in order to have, let's say, something that we would like to call a balanced and also realistic pathway to net zero in 2050. I think that is the overall message of the climate target plan, that we cannot sort of rely on an unprecedented acceleration of this transformation after 2030, but that basically we need to do a lot of things earlier than we thought. I think that's very clearly the message, and that links, of course, also strongly to the specific economic situation in which we are in now, which is one where we're trying to launch a recovery, not the least with the help of also relatively massive public investments. And it is, of course, even the more important under that particular condition that with so much investment now being stimulated by public funds, or at least that's the intention and the hope that we'll manage to do so. It is, of course, absolutely key that this investment is basically directed into or onto a path which leads us to net zero, and doesn't, to the contrary, lock in investments in a system which is very path dependent, which are ultimately incompatible with that. So that I think is the overall message and story from the climate target plan. Just to say a few words on the key elements of that. It shows indeed that the current pathway would lead us to a certain overachievement of the 40% target in 2030 by 45%, but that would only lead us to minus 60% in 2050. And hence, if we want to get to net zero, there is a clear recommendation that the 2030 target needs to be enhanced to minus 55%. Now, you've heard the views from the Parliament just before me, and you will of course all have seen that the demand is even more ambitious coming from that side. But again, clearly, the message is we need to accelerate over the next decade, because that is, I think, the other key message, that the next decade is going to be quite key in basically avoiding carbon lock-in and steering that investment in the right direction. The climate target plan also says that, and that's of course not new, that we have sectors which are relatively well advanced in their efforts, the power sector in particular, but also the energy intensive sector. industry sector, but that there are others, transport, agriculture, and buildings, which urgently need to catch up, and they do need to catch up over the next 10 years to get us on this sustainable pathway. And that is then I think already an important part, because when we look at the energy system, which is clearly going to be key, because it's 75% of emissions. If we look at that energy system, here clearly the message is that basically the power system will have a much more, let's say, horizontal and cross-cutting impact, because precisely the decarbonization of some of the so-called hard to decarbonize sectors is going to happen to a large extent via either direct or indirect electrification. And I think that's certainly the other message which is coming out clearly, and that in turn, excuse me, brings us to a logic of system integration, because we will have to see increasingly the interlinkages between a decarbonized power sector and transport, but also to buildings and also those parts of industry which are not yet on a pathway to decarbonization. So if we look at the energy system, clearly that means that the role of electricity is going to increase. Now we estimate it could be 30% of demand in 2030. Again, that's not, of course, news. I mean, that has been already included in the long-term strategy. But again, we see now that some of these things become more urgent and more imminent already in a 2030 perspective. Clearly, that means that coal is going to not yet disappear entirely, but it's going to be much less by 2030, about 70% less. Oil and gas will go down, but not as steeply over the next decade. Here, the steeper drop is then after 2030. And of course, renewables. It will be, we will land overall somewhere between 38 and 40% renewables in our energy consumption in 2030. And now looking at the power sector, which again is going to be really at the heart of this effort. Here we foresee now that the current renewables share in the power sector of about 32% would round about, or even more than double actually, would need to more than double until 2030 to 65%. And that again based to a very, very large extent on the contribution of wind, both onshore and offshore, and solar, whereas the relative importance of bioenergy and hydro is going to go down. So that I think clearly marks the challenges which you as system operators are going to face, and this again sort of is not a new. These issues aren't new. It's just again that this trajectory is basically going to be much steeper, and the penetration of renewables, and in particular variable renewables, is going to increase much faster than anticipated. Offshore wind was already mentioned, I think by Mr. Petersen before me, and indeed this is the one sector where we see the sort of steepest increase over today, and that's also why we're going to look at that with a specific strategy. Clearly, all of that can only be achieved if all instruments are reviewed that we have on a European level. Just a few words perhaps on the macroeconomic impact of the different scenarios that have been assessed. They are in terms of energy system costs, they're actually relatively moderate, about 11% of GDP in 2030 under more or less all compatible scenarios. It does include an enormous investment challenge. So the roundabout 260 billion of investment per year that we had already in mind, not in mind, but I mean that were already necessary basically under business as usual, will then have to be topped up by another 90 billion euro investment per year for the scenarios which bring us on a pathway to net zero. And that includes, under the current conditions, under the current economic conditions, in taking into account the impact of COVID. So, I mean, that is obviously a tall order to be able to mobilize that kind of investment. I want to finish by saying just a few words on infrastructure and the role of ultimately also of you as electricity TSOs. Clearly, it's going to be crucial. You will have seen that the major part of the legislative initiatives to implement these new targets are proposed for mid next year. But as you're also fully aware, we have, in a sense, front-loaded to the review of the 10E regulation, which I think is a clear sign of the, let's say, the urgency that is attached, that we attach to bringing this infrastructure policy fully in line with the new policies and pathways. Again, I mean, it clearly shows that infrastructure is a sort of a field where you have very long, basically lead times, and it means that you need to steer the development and also then ultimately investments in the right direction, really in a timely manner, because it's almost like a tanker. I mean, it takes a while to change course and to actually realize those investments, and that is why, I mean, clearly, to name perhaps the three main challenges that we're now looking into in the context of the 10E review, which are relevant then for infrastructure policy, is on the one hand, of course, to adapt the scope of the current regulation to the new policy priorities. Then secondly, to better reflect this paradigm, let's say, of system integration in the way that we go about planning this infrastructure. And thirdly, and not less importantly, indeed, to revisit what obstacles perhaps still remain for timely implementation of the infrastructure priorities that have been identified as not only compatible but actually necessary to bring about that very steep transition of the energy system. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and can only repeat, I think you as electricity TSOs are certainly going to be one, if not the key player to enable really this very, very fast clean energy transition, which is necessary, which will have to be built to a very, very large extent around a fully decarbonized power sector. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joachim, for this very comprehensive introduction. I think we heard through these two keynote speech on the central TS in enabling this transition, but as well the need for speeds, as well as the need for finding solution to decarbonize the system to the extent to what is expected now into the Green Deal for 2030 and net zero ambitions for 2050. So we are now going to switch the flow to Dimitrios Chaniotis, who is the chair in ENTSO-E of our System Development Committee, and who will provide a first introduction on the fundamental of our vision in order to be able to discuss it after through the panel. So Dimitri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. I hope you can still hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. As Laurent said, my name is Dimitrios Chaniotis, chairing the System Development Committee at ENTSO-E and working for the French system operator RTE. And I can reassure you it's me, the same person in the picture, just a victim of the lockdown, the recent lockdowns. So if we go to the first slide, my ambition now in the next 10-15 minutes is to give you a glimpse of the scenarios that ENTSO-E is publishing every 2 years, which constitute the basis for the work that you're going to be seeing later on, that we name it Vision of System Operation in 2030. So the starting point are the TYNDP long-term scenarios, and this is where I should say, and probably it's omitted from the slide, this is an effort that we do jointly with our colleagues from ENTSO Gas. So it's kind of the first, let's say, attempt for sector integration, deriving common scenarios between the gas and electricity sector. But further than that, these are full energy scenarios. So we're looking at all sectors, and we do model them in a very detailed way. For reminding, so we have published last year, which is an update of the scenarios that the vision builds upon. We have published last year the 3 scenarios for the next TYNDP cycle, which is going to be now ending in October. One scenario, we call it national trends, and it's based on the national energy and climate plans, or the best view we had of these energy and climate plans from member states. They are tailored to reach the targets of 40% reduction in CO2, 32% RES, and 32.5% energy efficiency. Now, we do complement these scenarios with our colleagues from ENTSO with 2 what we call top-down scenarios. Distributed energy and global ambition are the names that we gave them in order to reflect how they're built. So the distributed energy is based on a more decentralized approach to energy transition, more active customers, small-scale solutions, and so on, where the global ambition takes the other extreme of a more centralized approach with large-scale renewable development, imports of energy, and decarbonization. Both of them are targeting the COP21 targets, so 1.5 degrees Celsius target with 66.7% probability and net carbon neutrality by 2050. So these are 3 different scenarios coming from 3 different angles, but the main trends that we observe in all of them, they all do contribute to the vision. They all do quantify in a certain degree the challenges that we see ahead and the challenges that transmission system operators and the energy industry all together need to face. And that's why we use them for the work that you will see in the next webinars. If we go to the next slide to give you what we have accomplished, let's say, in terms of numbers in the scenarios. So the 2 lines that you see are the top-down scenarios, the green and the red line, and they show the trajectory of carbon emission reductions, reaching in 2050 full carbon net carbon neutrality, while the dots 2015, 2030 that you see there is the bottom-up scenarios. These are the data that we can compile. And these, as I said in my introduction, they are tailored for the 40% reduction in CO2. So there we have to ask ourselves the question, what will be the national policies when this emission target is going to be updated, if it is going to be updated, and to which point it is going to be updated, and what this would mean for the work that we are doing. I'm not sure if it is just an acceleration. The system needs to work every second. So we need to assess and we need to update our work and our thinking to reach the new targets. Just to say, the last word I want to say in this slide is that we have not rediscovered the wheel. We are quite in line with the Commission's projection, the long-term strategy, the 2 projections that they title 1.5 tech and life calculations in terms of CO2 reductions, albeit with a slightly different approach, but we're kind of in the same ranges as the Commission's projections. Now, going to the next slide to show you what it means in terms of the system, there you do have the full energy view of how the system is going to be looking like in the future. The first thing that strikes is the energy efficiency efforts and how critical this would be for the plausibility of the scenarios. So you can see that in terms of energy efficiency, we have a reduction of more than 40% in both top-down scenarios. This is a huge task, and I was happy to hear in the beginning that the effort now is in the implementation, because these are critical links in the chain leading to the decarbonization of 2050. Having said that, the phase out of fossil fuel is unavoidable. the role of gas into the future, and especially green gas and hydrogen in both scenarios is highlighted in the bars. But the most important is the share of renewable energy in the energy mix, in the primary energy mix, ranging from 69% in global ambition to 82% in distributed energy. These are quite ambitious numbers. And our aim in the next scenario that we're going to be publishing in a year time from now or more is to go even further. But at this point, for what we have published this year, this is the ambition in terms of penetration of renewable by 2050 in order to reach the targets of COP21. Going to the next slide to go a bit more into the what do we observe as system operators and what do we anticipate to have a major impact in the way we operate the system, is the first observation is the distributed resources and flexibilities are going to be connected. A big share of it is going to be connected on the distribution networks. Renewables, as well as storage, electric vehicles, and heat pumps. You can see in the graphs, for example, the central graph where we put the results of our simulations in terms of the contribution of demand-side response, the yellow, and batteries for the adequacy of the system and the capacity of the system to deal with fluctuations. And you can see that already by 2040, the contribution of storage to the stability of the system is going to be very, very significant. Of demand-side response, especially for the distributed energy, is going to be much more significant than thermal contributions. And this is a major shift, let's say, in the way that we perceive system stability and the way we deal with system stability in the future. The number of electric and plug-in vehicles, you can see that from our projections, our scenarios assume a very aggressive penetration of electric vehicles into the transport sector. And at the same time, we have quite a large increase of electric heat pumps and hybrid heat pumps into the heating sector. All these are reflected in the a big part of it, or the biggest part of it in some cases, is reflected in the distribution level. And this is where we should highlight one of the key findings of the vision is that TSO and DSO, transmission and distribution coordination and cooperation, will be increasingly more relevant and will be key in certain aspects in order to achieve a cost-efficient transition. The next slide, if I may. Now, another thing that we observe from all the scenarios is the high penetration of power electronic-based generation and transmission. By power electronic, I will not analyze exactly what it is, but for us, for system operators, is a change of paradigm. Our system has been operating on the principle of constant frequency throughout the synchronous area. Power electronics behave outside this frequency, let's say. They're strange, they strangely do not, they're not impacted by frequency. This will change thoroughly how the system is operated. Renewables connected behind converters, they have this behavior, and also HVDC links also introduce the same challenges. And you can see from the graphs that the ratio of power electronics on total installed capacity by 2030 is very significant in islands like Ireland or Great Britain, but also in continental Europe, in the Baltics. According to the scenario, you can see a significant penetration of power electronics into the system. So this means that this needs to be addressed. The TSOs need to find, to be prepared for this different mix of generation into the system and make sure that system stability and system security are maintained. This is one of the pillars of our vision for the 2030 and further. Going to the next slide. There are further challenges, and although sector integration is something that many consider it a buzzword, I think that For the scenarios that we have published this year, we take quite an aggressive approach into the sectorial integration, and in particular, the need for renewables in order to produce hydrogen, clean hydrogen and clean methane. You can see from our projections some significant steps from 2030 to 2040. The capacity of renewables dedicated practically to the production of hydrogen is in the order of 500 gigawatts, hydrogen and derived fuels as well. And the generation mix, it's in the order of 1,400 terawatt hours for the distributed energy scenario by 2040. These are enormous numbers. They have to be accommodated into the system in the most cost-efficient way, because this is the challenge here, that there is this prospect, this way forward, but we need to make sure that this is done in the most cost-efficient way and in the most proper way for the security of the system. So sector coupling is the link between energy carriers and sectors. Here, this slide is talking only about hydrogen, gas, and electricity, but it goes further. It goes on the heat. It goes on the transport. We never underestimate. We never put them in a different order of magnitude, at least for the ENTSO-E works. In the long term, power to gas will play a key role in the integration of excess electricity from variable renewables. It's quite important that power to gas acts as a long-term storage capability for the system, but also it is one of the main drivers for decarbonizing the gas supply. And our scenarios do confirm this trend. But of course, you can see the contrast between the distributed energy and the global ambition. It highly depends on whether this production of hydrogen is done locally or outside of the European Union. These are choices, these are policy choices, and our scenarios illustrate what are the relevant impact of both choices. Going to the next slide, because I'm trying to keep up with the time. So as I said before, we have a lot of new challenges, stability challenges for the system. It's going to be practically a new system to operate. The question is how to adapt. So we do have a lot of tools into our disposal. I can name just a few here in this slide. Connection codes are quite important. Connection codes, it's maybe the most important deliverable of ENTSO-E in the first 10 years of its existence. Connection codes in terms of connection requirements for generators and demand, preparing our system for the future, for the operation, enabling the coordination and the cooperation of system operators in operating the full system, and market codes, the market arrangements that are necessary for this to operate in the most cost-optimal way. We need a significant update in R&D efforts, coordinated efforts throughout the industry, TSOs, DSOs, research, academia, and so on. We do need to a significant update and real fast deployment of new solutions and new tools for the challenges that are coming ahead. New fast frequency response sources, we're running out of them, so we do need, again, the uptake of storage, demand response, and so on. This we do consider as tools for the future system. New roles for existing generators, and there I should also say consumers. And last but not least, network investments. Our aim is not to prioritize network investments over anything else, yet it is evident that infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, together with every other solution, will contribute to facing these challenges. We need voltage supporting units, new interconnectors, and of course, the internal grids of every country needs to be reinforced as well to accommodate for the new flows that we will see into the system based on the developments of the generation mix. My last slide is exactly about that. So before summer, sometime in July, it seems, we have published our analysis of investment needs, of system needs into the system according to these scenarios. We have made a deep dive study on what is needed into the system in order to make sure that it operates cost efficiently. The first, let's say, result is that from an economic optimality point of view, by 2030, 85 gigawatts of transmission needs to be installed for cross-border transmission primarily. This represents an investment of 1.3 billion euros per year, but it contributes to savings in generation costs up to 4.9 billion per year. So it's a no regret option. There is going to be a significant need for investments in the grid. Yet we're not going to be reaching, let's say, the illusion of a copper plate, meaning having no obstruction in the flow of energy from any point to any point in Europe. There is also transmission is not cost optimal to go this far. This by itself means that transmission is not the only solution. Other solutions need to be combined with network reinforcements to take Europe further: storage, power to gas, hybrid offshore infrastructures, and so on. I will finish just by saying that this should not be perceived as a competition between technologies to satisfy the needs. The network by itself, by definition, is what makes everything work together, is what mutualizes all these tools. And by its own nature, it adds value to all these solutions. So this should be seen as complementary, with the transmission being the mutualization of these resources for a most cost-optimal operation. And these numbers should be seen under this prism that I said. So I will finish here. I see Laurent probably keeping time and nodding that I should stop here. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions later on.
Thank you, Dimitri. I think a very comprehensive view on the fundamentals behind our vision and the need to transform this power system. I'm now going to pass the floor to Timothée Descroix and Damien Cortinas, who are going to introduce more the detail of this transformation. So Timothy is the chair of our policy and communication group, and Damien is the project leader on our Vision 2030 project. So Timothy and Damien, the floor are yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. I hope you can hear me. I had trouble to connect, so I don't have the video. Okay, perfect. So that's already good. At least I can pretend I am as young as I appear on the picture on the slide. Huh? So, well, maybe we can move directly to the next slide. I will just present quickly how we worked on this 2030 vision. Basically, the result of almost 2 years of work from the experts at ENTSO-E. Today, we are really at exciting times with fast-moving environment driven by the policy against climate change that has been said before. And this is really the first aspect on which we based our vision. There are clear political objectives of decarbonizing our economies. And at the time where we started to work on the vision, it was reflected in the EU 2030 targets and in the clean energy package. This led us to identify some structural changes, which you can see on the left in the slides, and which were also presented to some extent before me by, in particular by Dimitrios. Those main changes are changes in how electricity is generated, with production which becomes cleaner, of course, and also more variable and more distributed. Then we have also lots of changes on the consumption side, with which is evolving with first new usages, with the electrification of many sectors like electromobility in particular, and of course power to gas and so on can also become important aspects. And then also more active consumers, what we used to call prosumers, which also is also a major change in the future. And then the third main trend is really this integration of sectors that we have discussed a bit before, but it's really a major political priority now in the EU, and it's also a key aspect if we want to be successful with this long-term target of decarbonizing our economy and having climate neutral EU. So all this requires to adopt a more system-wide view, and this is true when we talk of system development, of course, but and infrastructure deployment, but also when we talk about market and operational aspects. On top of that, or here on the slide on the bottom, you have also digitalization, which is also a very important development, which is providing us also with some tools to face the challenges that are raised by all these changes. In general, all these changes are making our environment more complex. We have a more complex system operation, of course. We have new coordination interfaces needed between different levels, between TSOs and DSOs, of course, also between different sectors, gas, hydrogen, mobility, heating become all more interlinked. The speed of network development is also not always matching the speed of REST deployment, and that can really be a challenge sometimes. But all these challenges are also accompanied by new opportunities like digitalization I mentioned already before. Prosumers can also contribute to provide new tools to adapt the system. We can also, market integration is also helping to share the resources in a more efficient way across Europe and so on. So from all these trends, there is a clear conclusion, which is that the electricity system is changing and has to change, and also with TSOs we also need to evolve and to prepare for these changes. So that's why we did this work on a vision 2030. We built these 2030 scenarios, and there was a lot of work by experts from all the fields, so from system operation, from market design, and from system development, system planning, and they work together to really build a robust and resilient vision. This is really, the goal was really to propose a real expert view on the challenges to face, and this also takes into consideration the fact that the future is dynamic and is also uncertain. So that's why also this vision really has to be resilient. And this is, we see that now with the new political objectives. We have the Green Deal objectives, we have the climate law, and all this shows that everything is accelerating, and we need to really work on that. And today this vision is really, yes, this contribution to the TSO community's contribution to enabling technically all these political objectives. We want also, as Dimitrios said before, the transmission is not the single solution. So we really need to work all together to discuss this vision with stakeholders. We wanted to organize this week to really have this discussion, to have our vision challenged, and so on. This webinar series this week, I hope it will really lead to interesting discussions and to further improve this vision. Because we have a clear horizon, but there is with this 2050 long-term target, but we have to also define all the milestones and how we get there. So everything we have discussed till now will further accelerate. Changes will be more radical than even anticipated before, and what is at stake is really our common future and also the success of the EU climate and the energy policy. So I will now leave the floor to Damian, who will provide a bit more concrete overview of this vision, what we have worked on, and what will be discussed more in detail in the different webinars this week.
Thank you, Timothée. Can you hear me? It sounds okay. Hi.
Yeah. Yes, Damian is working.
That's it. Yeah, to check. Next slide. So my name is Damian Cortinas, and I will say I have had the pleasure and of leading and coordinating this Vision 2030 effort from ENTSO-E. Next slide, please. So what you have here now, I'm going to do is just a short introduction to the main conclusions of this work on the vision. I am just going to name several different aspects that will be developed all through the webinars that we are going to hold during these 3 days. The main thing is summarized in this slide. Is that the work with the vision, with all the experts from the different TSOs, from the different countries, more than 25, as was at the beginning by Laurent, led us to identify 6 major, what we call driver and trends in the power system towards 2030. What we mean by this is what are the things that are going to change the most the way the power system is going to evolve in the next 10 years. And the 6 are the ones that you see here. First of all, the rise of distributed flexibilities that will need even closer TSO and DSO cooperation that we have today. The second one is the rise of power electronics. As Dimitrios said before, the graphics show a very huge increase in the near future. And this means that we are moving through what we call hybrid alternative current direct current systems in Europe, from systems that were not designed for this at the beginning. The third one is what we call markets and physics. Market design is going to evolve strongly in the next 10 years, all moving in the directions of integrating more closely how the market works, how the network works, all in the interest of European consumers. The fourth is wind generation and interconnection synthesis. We will see the development of grids that are going to go into the sea, what we call offshore developments. The fifth is energy system integration, that was already introduced by our guest speakers at the beginning of the conference, that power goes beyond power and integrates with other energies. And the fifth is what we call mastering operational challenges. There are things that are needed for the day-to-day business of system operators that will be key for mastering the next 10 years. They are mostly resilience in the face of threats of all different kinds, the ability to forecast what's going to happen. This is essential to operate a system, and the promises of automation of artificial intelligence. I am not demonstrating now in this webinar why this is important. For this, you will need to connect to all the 4 webinars that we are going to have this afternoon, tomorrow, and on Wednesday. We are going to go deeply into why each one of the subjects is important, what they mean, and what we are planning to do about it. But this gives the whole picture. And this picture, again, is not everything that's going to happen, but it is the things that we have identified as TSOs that will be the most relevant and that will need the most work from all of us, and will change the most the way the power system is seen in the next 10 years. If you go to the next slide. What does it mean? Well, it means when you look at these 60 drivers, is that we are moving in the direction, even more than today, of what we call a true system of interconnected systems. This is what we try to summarize in this graphic. We're having different systems that are having to work together. We're going to have the transmission and the distribution system, the alternative current and direct current systems, the markets, and the operations that can consider as different systems that they need to function more seamlessly than have done up to now. We are going to have onshore and offshore grids, and we are going to go through sector coupling or energy system integration beyond power, interfacing with other kinds of energies and other sectors in the future. So this main idea, when you see all of them, we go into a future where we will have to make work a system that in fact will be a lot of interconnected systems that need to work together for the benefit of all European consumers in Europe. Or if we put it in a different way, and this will be the next slide on the main concept of the vision, this system of systems will also have different geographical scales. When you see these 6 key drivers that we identified before, all of them point in 2 different and complementary directions. Is that the future will need a stronger European coordination, and the future will need also a stronger link to local particularities and sensibilities. When you take the flexibilities, there is a strong local component to them. If you take sector integration, there is also a strong local component to it. But if you take market design, if you take offshore grids, if you take the hybrid AC/DC networks, these are linked to a stronger cooperation at the European level. So we will see these 3 geographical scales that will all become extremely relevant for the future: the European, the national, and the local. Today, TSOs work mainly at national level, but we have already developed what we could say are the tools for a stronger European coordination. That is ENTSO-E, our association that is hosting today this event, this series of events, and that is what we use to cooperate between us. We have the regional coordination centers that are coming into place with the clean energy package. We have what we have always had, TSO cooperation. And we have the local level, and the local level will need a stronger cooperation, a stronger work between TSOs and DSO in the future in order to make it all work together. These geographical scales will have multilateral interfaces. And the key word for this will be the interoperability. How do we make it work? How do you make it work? The fact that local issues will have an impact also on the European level and the national level. And in this future, what is clear to us is that system operators with an S, we mean transmission, distribution, the other energy, we have different system operators that will have a key role to facilitate the working together of the system of systems with a governance that will need to involve all the stakeholders and will be a much bigger and diverse constitution that we have today because of the all different systems that have to work together. And again, with a very strong focus on putting consumers at the heart of the energy transition. That will come naturally because the flexibility is part, for instance, it means the rise of the active consumer in a level that will be local at the beginning, but will become relevant also at the national and European level. So this is what we see as the main conclusion for how the future is going to shape. And this is what will allow us, we as system operators, the transmission ones who are talking today, even if, again, there are a lot of different system operators that will need to address these issues, will allow us to take advantage of all our know-how and also to work together in order to raise to the challenge of the energy transition in Europe. Again, this is just an overview. To get into the details, you need to participate to different webinars. I strongly encourage to do that. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate also to use the slide of today, and we'll manage to answer them all at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for your attention, and I see Laurent that it's now giving way for the next steps.
Thank you, Damien, and thank you to Timothée for introducing this key concept of one system, of interconnected system. So now we have invited three personalities among our stakeholders to react to this vision. So Wendel Trio, who is the director of CAN Europe, Monique Goyens, who is the director of BOIC, so representing the consumer in Europe, and Yorgo Chatis-Markakis, who is the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe, one of the systems which we need to interconnect with the power system. So Wendel, if you hear me, the floor is yours for your first reaction to this presentation.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. First of all, just to say that we very much, as NGOs and as an NGO federation working on climate change, we very much welcome this debate and this conversation. We believe that it's a very good thing that ENTSO-E is looking at preparing the future, and the future will be challenging. I think that is very clear. We have seen that the future is very challenging, not only because of the political circumstances, but also because the climate actually obliges us to change our ways of working, because otherwise it will have a devastating impact also on our energy infrastructure. So it's good that we start looking at that. We believe it's also very good that beyond the very specific Vision 2030, as part of the TYNDPs, ENTSO-E has looked at making the future energy system compatible with the Paris Agreement. I think that it's very clear this is an important element of how we can get out of this climate change crisis. It's good that ENTSO-E looks at the 1.5 degrees target, because it is an important benchmark for staying below the most dangerous forms of climate change. We clearly, as NGOs, have a bit of a more ambitious perspective of what 1.5 means for Europe. We believe that next to taking into account just a clean division of what is left of global emissions, we believe that Europe, with its much bigger responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions in the past, and which its much bigger capacities to actually deal with this and invest in alternatives, that we need to do a bit more. And from that side, our vision on the TYNDP is that we actually need to do more, and more sooner. And for us, there's a number of specific elements that are very crucial elements that needs to be looked at, and which need to be kind of the criteria on which the 2030 vision needs to be attached. One is that we would need to look at scenarios that really go for 100% renewable energy. I think if we look at the future of our electricity system, we really need to be able to say we need to phase out fossil fuels. We need to do that rather rapidly. As far as the NGOs are concerned, we need to phase out fossil fuels already by 2040, and we need to be able to replace them by clean alternatives. And those clean alternatives clearly are renewable energy. And to do that, looking beyond pure the power system, it's very clear that if we really want to develop alternatives, this will need to be based on very high levels of electrification. And I think that's where an even bigger challenge comes to ENTSO-E, to kind of really look at a society with multiple times the level of electrification that we currently have. And that's our first concern. Second concern is that we need to look at what are really the technologies that can help us do so. And there we see that there's still a high level of support for carbon capture and storage, for instance. In some of the scenarios, there's a high level of reliance on hydrogen and so on. I think we need to put all of those technologies in its right framework and ensure that we have an approach that really fits the reality of what these technologies can offer. Third point, very specifically on the vision, we believe that we really need to look at how we can combine a distributed system, and that will definitely be the future, that we go to much more distributed systems, but how we can combine that also with developments happening at the global level. And I think we should not be kind of neglecting what happens outside of the EU, but clearly integrate that into the vision so that we can develop an energy system that is interconnected in the EU, but also interconnected to, in some way or the other, to the rest of the world. I would like to leave it there for a first reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell. I think very clear feedback on the need to combine the global and the local perspective. So maybe I'm going now to switch to Monique, if you are connected, and give your perspective to this vision.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting us to this discussion. As Wendell said, we also very much appreciate this vision and also the whole thinking behind it. And we also realize that consumers are part of the conversation. Consumers are enablers of the energy transition. And what I would like to stress here is that there is a lot that is being asked from the people in the, let's say, the green transition. They need to change the way they eat, they need to change the way they heat or cool their houses, they need to change the way they travel, they move, they buy or don't buy products. So you really need to engage into a conversation with them. And in order to do that, I think we as a consumer organization, and me today at this event, I really need to translate your buzzwords like distributed flexibility or system operators and acronyms into how can we bring that to real life situations, and how can we make people take up the new ways of heating their homes that they need to engage into. And I wanted to stress some consumer, let's say, expectations and needs with regard to the 3 Ds: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. So a decarbonized, let's say, energy system, yes, that means that consumer homes will be heated or cooled by with renewable energy, and they will have automated devices that will, switch on and switch off depending on the energy that is available. Now, that's theory, but how is this going to happen in real life? How will consumers go for that solution because they need to make the investment. And that is the number one concern for many, many consumers. How is this going to be affordable? So there is a huge role for policymakers to play to make the sustainable solution as the most affordable one. And it's not only about giving like fiscal incentives or giving reductions. And what we see is that it is very important because it is not just about buying a car. It is about heating your home. And those devices, when you choose your device as a consumer, it is there for 15 to 20 years. So you need really like a clear vision as a person about what is the correct choice and whether this is something that will be supported by the political or by the energy system in the long term. Therefore, we believe that in order to make that acceptable and affordable for consumers, policymakers and you need to really analyze and assess the impact on different types of consumers, different segments of consumers, of the different options that are available. Be it district heating, be it solar panels, be it other combinations of many different sorts, and to make the infrastructure decisions that are those that are the most sustainable, both in terms of affordability, availability, and uptake by consumers. And to communicate these choices long in advance, because what we see is that price is not the only barrier to consumer uptake of new energy solutions. It's also lack of clarity. You need, as a consumer, to have clarity and a stable environment in order to really be able to take up those solutions. And you have to be nudged. Afterwards, you have to be helped to get into the right system. On decentralization, so again, solar panels will be part of the solution that consumers need to be to put on their roof. They're also while the price factor seems to be now getting more and less, let's say, relevant, there is still a lack of trustworthy advice because people don't really know whom to trust. And as this is really, you know, when people are hesitating and they need to change the system, they are very, there is a lot of inertia that needs to be overcome. And this inertia can be overcome if you make trustworthy advice available. And also the incentives, like dynamic tariffs, you don't, I mean, what I see now in some of the contracts that I have seen, I'm a lawyer. I have no PhD in quantum mathematics, but sometimes those tariffs are so complex and so complicated to and not predictable that consumers will never take that up. If they have to check every 15 minutes what's happening to the tariff, this is something, it must be consumer friendly, it must be easy to use, it must be fun to use. So this is, I mean, it's just real life check. Because the system can be as sophisticated as it can be, if consumers are not understanding it, it won't deliver the benefits neither to the consumer nor to the society. And last point, if you allow me, Laurent, in terms of timing. On the digitalization, there is this part of automated devices. This will be really part of the energy solution because if the consumer doesn't need to think about it, and it's the heating or it's the fridge or so who's going to make that exercise of adapting the energy consumption, then it needs to be privacy friendly. It needs to be safe because if a device is always connected to the system, there is a higher degree of risk of fire safety issues. It needs, of course, to be secure, meaning that it's also linked to the telecom system and it can be hacked. And for the moment, our regulatory framework for preventing or compensating damage linked to personal data breach, to safety when it comes to connected products and to security when it comes to connected products is not, let's say, energy transition proof. And that certainly needs to be addressed. And I will stop here because otherwise I have still some more suggestions to make. But thank you very much already for giving me the floor.
Thank you. So a lot of things to do from what we hear, communication, trustworthiness, privacy, security, a lot of interesting elements to be incorporated into our vision. So last but not least, I would like to ask Jorgo to come and make his view and statements on how you see the hydrogen system coming into play and integrating with the power system and this notion of one system of interconnected system. So Jorgo.
Yeah, thank you, Laurent, and thanks for the opportunity also for organizing this. We have seen an unprecedented look at hydrogen the last months, the last weeks. and that has to do, of course, with our Paris Agreement targets and the higher importance of renewables, the higher problem, the bigger problem of congestion. And here, of course, hydrogen can jump in, also immediately jump in. We are very happy that, to give you an example, tomorrow at the Franco-German summit, hydrogen will be one of the top issues, and France and Germany are looking into building up a mega factory or mega gigafactory even for electrolyzers, because this is the technology that is needed in that joint vision. Electrolyzers that are placed possibly very, very close to the origin of the renewable energy, because that only makes the system then more efficient. And this is exactly where we want to find ourselves. Some messages have gone wrong the last, possibly the last months. There's one major element that we all need to fight for. That's more electricity, that's more electrons in the system. At the same time, we see the physical limitations, and that is where we would like to help out, so to say, as the hydrogen world, the hydrogen technologies, in order to make sure that nothing is curtailed, that congestion is not an issue, and that the renewably produced energy can be used immediately. Low-hanging fruit is for us industrial use, just because it's so actual and so current. And Laurent, you might like it. The example, the Franco-German summit discusses exactly that, having Innogy on board as one of the company, and having so to say consumers from steel and chemical industry directly as consumers that need that hydrogen. So we don't even need to discuss about efficiency right now. We can avoid congestion by integrating this energy into a feedstock and use the feedstock immediately. This is even a bankable business case. And these are elements where I think we need to discuss, and we need to discuss very soon also how to adapt the infrastructure. But let me make one very important point on trust, because we all see that there might evolve a new system, a parallel system using hydrogen as a gaseous form of electricity, if you wish, also in pipelines, of course. And here we need to understand that for us, the carbon content is the new currency, the carbon content of this hydrogen. Of course, renewably produced hydrogen will hierarchically be the most important, because the carbon content will be very low. All other sorts of hydrogen will cost more because they have a higher carbon content. But how to analyze, how to detect whether there is a lot or not much carbon in it? There we believe in the 5 T's. So we need to trace, we need to track this carbon content transparently in order to make it tradable. That's the fourth T. And only this creates then trust, the 5th T. So we believe that the guarantees of origin systems that exist already in the electricity market do not match 100% with the needs that we have, nor do the similar systems or other systems in the gas market. So we believe that it makes sense, based on these 5 T's, to create a new system of tracing and tracking, a robust and transparent system, also in order to create trust. And we would like to bring in our ideas also in your activities, Laurent, and just to make ourselves an interesting partner of your discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jorgo. I think your comment is very valid. We heard in our vision on the importance of the interfaces between these various systems, and the one which you mentioned is a clear evidence on a very important interfaces to basically make sure green molecules get produced out of renewables in the electricity system, and not out of, I would say, balancing entities being not green instead. So that there is definitely some work here. So maybe I'm going now to encourage all the speakers to open their mic and their camera. I hope the the system is not going to collapse. And we're going to go through the Q&A discussion. Would like to thank already the 600 people connected to our events. That is quite impressive, and showing the importance to do that discussion. Maybe I see that Morten is still connected into the presentation. If it's the case, if you want to raise any question or any thoughts out of what you heard so far into the vision or the input of the various stakeholders.
Well, first of all, thank you for all the input and reflections on these topics, and clearly, to me, it just demonstrates the magnitude of the challenges ahead of us, and all these extremely important perspectives on this. I'm coming back to what I think will be one of the absolute key issues here, and which is to get people on board in this transition, and this is going to be a mix of incentives, of policies, obviously, and as well as emphasizing the issue of implementation. And it's still a big question in my mind. I'm not sure if anyone has the right answers to this yet, but getting people on board and getting people to see that there is a viable path in terms of going to climate neutrality by 2050 is so big and huge and encompassing and so important before we get to all the specifics. So I just want to thank for all the reflections and contributions on this, and I'm looking so much forward to all the work ahead. Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Morten. So who takes it? Monique, you start maybe. The most natural side.
Yes, thank you. I mean, Diogo was next to me. Okay. I just hear an echo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are already solutions that exist for consumers to be able to engage and to take it up, like you mentioned. And there was a project that was funded by the European Union, by Horizon 2020 project, that combined really different types of support for people. And in fact, what people fear the most is, on the one hand, the upfront costs and the lack of clarity on the payback period. And if you can address those two elements already, you can already really nudge quite a lot of people into taking up the new energy solutions. And that was done. That was done also combined by a group of consumer organizations. It's called the Clear 2 project. You can find it on the internet. And they have also organized group purchases. So consumers were not left alone by having to take a decision about what heat pump, for example, to buy or what solar panel, but the whole system was being managed by a group of consumer organizations that negotiated with different suppliers and installers that tested the panels and the heat pumps. So the consumers were really reassured that those were the best products, and they were negotiated at the lowest possible prices. It had an amazing impact on energy consumption in those houses. And so that's the type of solutions that can be rolled out at a much broader scale, and that can be a win-win for everybody, for the system, for the consumer's wallet, and for the environment and for the health of the people, because it's decarbonized energy. So there are plenty of solutions. You just need the political will to roll them out.
Thank you, Monique. Maybe Jorgo, you want to speak? You raised your hand as well. You are muted. I think we had to mute you because of the echo. So if you can unmute.
I think now I'm unmuted. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
yeah, I can of course speak on behalf of the industry, and it's quite amazing that some ideological problems that have been there possibly 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we started to think about more grid balancing using hydrogen, could be overcome. So I'll give you an example. The biggest producer of renewable energy in the world, Enel, and Morten will like this, Ørsted, the biggest producer of offshore wind and production. They are talking to us now very openly, also TSOs from the electricity side very openly and pragmatically. And this is very, very important that we talk pragmatically with each other, because if we really want to do this decarbonization in bulk and in big volume, we need to talk with each other. And I still remember when some of these companies, not the ones I mentioned, but some others, were really hostile because they said it's not efficient, so we don't even think about it. We understand more and more that it's not the technological efficiency. Laurent, you mentioned the interfaces. It's the system efficiency. We call it the climate efficiency that counts in the end. And here I have one plea, one question also to ask and to invite you all to think about it. We have recently seen, Morten, also from your colleagues, not from yourself, of course, from your colleagues, some attacks of people saying, well, these hydrogen people are too fossil. In my association, we have more than 200 members. We have 11-12% of companies that you could say have a fossil or a conventional background. They are investing 85% into the green technology. 85% of all the investments done is from them. So basically the Ørsted example, and I would like to invite you also, Morten, to make more publicity for the Ørsted example, formerly oil and gas company that now turned to the biggest producer of offshore wind. And that is what we want to have. And I am quite fascinated to see the commitment of all kinds of industries, not only the electrolyzer providers, the techno providers, but also the ones who come from that background to really invest, to really go that way with us. I think a little bit more of openness to discuss, to listen to each other, but to be clear on the investment. If you don't invest, okay, we don't talk to you, fossil. But if you invest, I should talk to you. I want Ørsted to become the role model for all of them. And hydrogen is one pathway. It's not the only. It's one pathway for them to help decarbonization. And I think we should not close that door. We should open it, but we should be watchdogs in seeing that this process really happens. That's what I wanted to say. And thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Jorgo. Maybe Wendel, you want to mention something related to this consumer or the comment made by Jorgo?
More generally, I think that Morten actually said it, that we will need to have a combination of policies and regulation and seeing how we can involve the consumer, because there's always going to be many different types of consumers. Some will be front runners, other will be more latecomers, and we need to have kind of a right approach to all of them. But certain elements we just need to do through regulation, and that is, for instance, when we opt for an overall transition away from fossil fuels towards renewables. I think that is something that governments will need to enable. On the other hand, if we're looking at further developing the concept of prosumers, if we're looking at furthering reduction of energy consumption in households, etc., that's where we will need to find the right ways to motivate, stimulate consumers to be part of the solution. I think it will be in different ways, and that's both for of course the individual consumers as for the big industry consumers. We always need to see what is the best way to move forward. On the hydrogen issue, I mean, we fully agree that hydrogen is part of the solution. We just want to see that this is not being promoted as the only solution that will solve everything. That is something that we don't really agree with some of the voices that we sometimes hear in the political world. We believe that renewable energy is the first part of the solution, and then we need to see what is the best way to transport this renewable energy to the right set of users, and that for hydrogen, those users will need to be very specific, because we can't that easily transport hydrogen as we can transport electricity.
Maybe I would like to turn that question, thank you, Wendel, to Damian and Dimitrios, and asking you whether you think we took this consumer aspect enough into the vision, and what's your reaction to the comment here? I think, Damien, you're still muted. Or maybe Dimitri, if you can unmute more easily.
Does it work for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I will talk about the scenarios, and the consumer vision is part of the scenarios. We have actually, as I showed before, we have demonstrated quite a significant update in how the consumers can help on the adequacy of the system. So it is part of our considerations. I fully agree with what was said before. There is not one single solution there. There are many solutions. And I like what Mrs. Goyen said about trust, because ultimately we are all addressing ourselves to European citizens. And I think our mission as ENTSO-E is to give trustworthy advice. And this is where our scenarios are coming from. So all solutions are considered. We do not pick winners or losers into our scenarios. All are considered on the same on the same level. And therefore, we do need to, let's say, to maintain this agnostic approach. And to do that, we need your help, all of you. We need your help when we elaborate the scenarios in order to be able to do that. Now, going back to the question of the consumers, I think it will become even more central into our next scenario building cycle. Because again, technologies evolve, policies evolve, and this allows us to have better projections and better estimations. So I would invite you to participate very, very closely to this effort. I think you already are. Please. And yeah, I don't know if Damian wants to complement more precisely on the vision, if the voice issues are resolved.
I can maybe, here's Timothy, I can maybe say a word on that. I think there are several aspects. I would not say that we considered all relevant aspects of consumers' involvement and so on, and all the issues that Monique Goyens mentioned. But I think there are at least three key elements that we need to consider. One is, of course, data transparency, that I think will help to, well, we make a lot of effort with the transparency platform and providing a lot of data and so on, and I think this will help to others to develop also more consumer-friendly tools and so on to adapt the systems to the real-time production, for example. The second aspect is cybersecurity. Here there is some work ongoing on a cybersecurity network code, and I think that will also be a quite important element, including for ensuring this trust is there. And the third aspect also is on market design. There is quite a lot of work on market design with several options to also discuss how we involve consumers as more active participants, and I think this will be also a key element. And this is a discussion this afternoon, if I'm right.
Okay, so maybe Morten, if you want to have a last comment to this particular aspect, or otherwise we can switch to the other question. Up to you.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So now we're going to run through the Slido's question, and I would like to thank the people who raised their question. We have over 20 questions, so that's interesting. I'm going to take them by priorities. In terms of number of likes and the popularity of this question. So the first one is raised by a colleague from Energinet, and maybe it's an interesting question for everyone. Dimitri has introduced 3 scenarios, and more decentralized, more centralized, and one more based on national energy and climate plan. So which one of the TYNDP is the most likely in your view, Dimitri? And would like to maybe hear your other views. So whether the system will be more centralized, decentralized, or more as what it currently developed.
Yeah. So the short answer is no. We do not distinguish between the scenarios in terms of probability. This is not our job. We do provide 3 different pathways to the same target. The plausibility of this depends on many things. So you cannot just simply attach a possibility and a probability and say that one scenario is more probable than the other. Our task is to be able, when we design the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure, to make a transparent assessment of the value of this infrastructure into multiple very contrasted or less contrasted, however you say it, futures. This is what is going to enable the investments. We consider this as part of assuring the trust of the deciders in terms of investing in infrastructure. We have talked a lot, maybe not in this panel, but in other panels, about the risk of stranded investment or the wrong investments. And we think it's critical to have an agnostic approach in the scenarios, have contrasted scenarios, in order to ensure that whatever we invest on is robust. So it holds true, it adds value to every other solution in any possible future. And that's why we do not, let's say, identify one scenario as being more probable than another. Thank you.
Okay. Any other reaction to this specific question, Jorgo?
Yeah, maybe to pick it up from there immediately. The most important element will be to contribute to overcome the congestion, and we see this already in reality. With hydrogen, of course, we see this in the reality that most of these projects that do produce hydrogen at the source of origin of the renewable energy will then look for a dedicated consumer. I mentioned the Franco-German example, but that's also in the Dutch-German context. You have the same issue. So it will be then brought to especially steel and chemical industry, and that's the starting point. Dimitrios just said you need a clear investment path, or you need reliable investment. Here you have it. These chemical or steel industries are very keen to have this decarbonized feedstock, because that decarbonizes the whole business model. So they are not eager, but they are ready to pay even more. So we will start with dedicated pipelines between clusters, between the production and the industrial cluster. And then we will connect clusters. And that creates already a first idea of a backbone. And only after comes the natural view to have more dedicated infrastructure, gas pipelines retrofitted for hydrogen. But we start again with reliable investment, which comes from industrial consumers. Thank you.
Yes, Monique?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm maybe a little bit the exotic animal in all these technological discussions, but I would really like to stress that, I mean, I know that maybe there are too many, out of the 600 participants, too many engineers in that room, or certainly a lot, but please, if you want this to make a reality for people, you have to combine technological research and applied research with behavioral economics, because behavioral economics will be the part that make it work for people. And that means you need to take account, it's not calculation, it's about how can you address the biases that people have, the inertia bias, you know, the fact that as long as you don't trust the system, and you know, you have, as I think it was Dimitrios who said, it's those who take up very quickly, then you have the latecomers, and you really need to address all those elements. And this is not technology, but it will be part of the solution. Otherwise, you won't get it. You won't get the ball rolling quickly enough. And there is still an emergency. I mean, in the time scale of people's, let's say, long-term planning when it comes to the heating or let's say energy in the house, you really need to push them very quickly in order to make the move. And that's not technology. Thank you.
Wendel?
Yes, thanks. I mean, regarding the very specific question, obviously, if the EU institutions agree on a new target for 2030, a new climate target for 2030 that will also lead to an increase of all the other targets, including for energy efficiency and renewables and so on, and will actually lead to a complete revision of the NECP. So that scenario definitely is already outdated at the moment, but I don't think it's as such that important, because I think the purpose usually of scenarios is to help do the thinking, and by making scenarios that are fairly different, we actually look at things in a different way. But if we look at what will be the real implementation of the scenario, it will likely be a combination of the three, having some very distributed elements, having some centralized elements, and having things that are really based on what national governments are planning. For us, the most important thing is that there's a sufficient level of ambition in whatever scenario we will have in the future.
Thank you. So maybe we can switch to the next question, which is from the Finnish Energy Association. Two questions. Do we need especially renewable electricity, or rather talk about low carbon energy as a whole? And do we see a risk with the offshore strategy that member states again implement subsidies which deteriorate the functioning of the electricity markets? So maybe who wants to start with this question? Jorgo?
Again, I want to say also for Wendel, because there might be some doubts that we regard electricity as the most important. No, it is the most important. Electricity is the most important result from a renewable production, and we cherish that. However, we see that there is more and more demand, and there will be more and more markets for this new commodity. Maybe not the next 5 years, but definitely the next 10 years, you will have a global commodity which will be clean hydrogen, so carbon-free or carbon low hydrogen. And we call this hydrogenables. So these are hydrogen. This is hydrogen that is produced directly at the source offshore on an electrolyzer that is also offshore, using pipelines directly from this source. Why pipelines? Much cheaper. Laurent knows that. We discussed that already. We might argue what's the price difference, but to transport a molecule is today cheaper. And these are elements that where we think it fits very well into the offshore initiative also of the European Commission. And if you in the end see there are certain, you need steel for the offshore initiative, a lot of steel, and hydrogen can help to reduce the carbon content of steel dramatically. We are about to work with first steel companies. By the way, one is very close to the Finnish border. It's SSAB, LKAB. It's called Hybrid, this project. And then you have then the circle. You produce low carbon steel on the basis of the hydrogenables for more renewable energy, for more wind generators. I just want to make this case in order to show it's not that hydrogen is an enemy or a competitor of electricity. This is not the case. It's just an addition, and also will be a commodity based on a totally different business model, for instance, for the production of renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien.
Yeah, maybe can you hear me now? It's working.
It's working.
Yeah. Sorry at the time. Technical issues.
Welcome back.
Technical issues is really what I would like to take the floor now, answering the second part of the question from the Finnish energy from the Finnish energy, and also what has been said is that the question was, is offshore going to degrade the functioning of the market on the system in Europe? And there was a lot of questions before about the difference between technology, behavior, and markets. And what I want to say is that in the vision that we have developed, we are aware of these issues, but we think that our role as system operators is to develop technical solutions that are going to allow the policy goals that are today in the future in Europe. We have discussed about the scenarios. The scenarios all go into the same direction. The only question today is a question of the strength, the quickness that is going to go faster, is going to go slower. But in any case, we are going to see how offshore and onshore will have to work together, because offshore will clearly be part of the energy mix in Europe for a lot of reasons that goes into the Green Deal, but not only one. We see that we are going to see sector integration between electricity and hydrogen. This is clearly going to be the future for a lot of reasons, maybe not everywhere in Europe, but certainly in some parts of Europe. And we will have active consumers tomorrow that will need to have part of the complexity dealt with, of what that we mean to be active consumers. What we try to develop in the vision, and again, this is something we are going to develop in the webinars that come now, is how do we make everything this, how we make the whole work together in a way that delivers the policy goals. And one part of the solution will be innovation, and we have a webinar on that, in how technology can be of service in order to provide this kind of solutions that will allow us to make it work. Other solutions will come on the market design. We have another webinar on that, and how the market can be designed in a way that goes also into this direction. But in the end, what we need is to find how the technology is going to work at the service of the policy goals and in the end of the consumers. And I think this is one of the most important messages of what we're trying to do with the vision work. How to put all the pieces together in a way that works for the European consumers and for the policy goals.
Thank you, Damien. I would also like to take another question. Actually, I'm going to group two questions, which are more related to the need for large investment in cross-border transmission capacity. And to what extent is this already planned? Is it on the top of current investment plans? And I would also like to link this with another question from our colleagues from Montpellier. Are there any additional measures planned to fasten these cross-border electricity network next to the hydrogen ones? So what are the, maybe Dimitri, you want to comment on the system needs or any other who wants to discuss about that?
Yes, just to clarify the figure that you saw in my last slide, the 85 gigawatts of additional transmission capacity is not what is planned. It includes what is planned. It's kind of the, let's say, the economically optimal grid reinforcements that we can foresee by the 2030 horizon in order to maintain the system operating optimally. Now, again, our goal is not to say that, and I think we have been quite clear there, by doing this analysis, it doesn't translate automatically into more transmission infrastructure. It translates to the need of having the system operating in a different, more optimal way. Transmission infrastructure is one of the tools of doing that. And as we demonstrate in our analysis, in certain cases is the most efficient tool. So yes, indeed, we need to step up. Yes, indeed, there is going to be need for more infrastructure. But I think in the beginning of our discussion, we were talking about Green Deal, recovery plan, and so on. Again, I repeat it, and I will not be tired. Our task as transmission system operators is to demonstrate that we do the most appropriate investments, the most robust investments. It's not to avoid as much as possible, because this cannot be avoided completely, the risk of stranded investments. And this is the task of the TYNDP, and this is the task of the scenarios. So in a couple of weeks' time or a bit more, you're going to have the TYNDP out from ENTSO-E. There you will see the investments. We're still a TYNDP for electricity. It doesn't talk about hydrogen. I understand there's going to be a lot of debate about hydrogen infrastructure. I think it should follow the same guidelines of transparency, of a clear path, an investment path, a reasonably costed path for investing in hydrogen infrastructure, because want it or not, in all our scenarios, hydrogen is part of the solution and is part of the big picture in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Maybe I will switch to another question, an interesting one. Do you expect hydrogen to take place close to electricity generation, close to industry using hydrogen, or where excess heat from electrolysis can be used. So how do you see this combination of hydrogen and electricity system to happen in the future? Jorgo?
Yes, indeed. I think the CEO of TenneT has come up last week with a quite interesting article in the German Handelsblatt, and there's an English translation of the article where she says, first of all, I was quite amazed by the title. The title is "Hydrogen is a Question of Survival." But the more important thing, that's the title. The more important thing is that TenneT has a quite reliable tool to measure where the contribution of the electrolyzer is highest for the whole system. And this tool definitely and clearly says the closer to the source of the renewable energy, the more the contribution for the whole system. So it should not be close to the industry, it should be close to the production. Whoever wants to see how this works, there's a wonderful example in the utility of Mainz, very close to the Frankfurt airport, where 6 megawatts, it's just 6 wind generators, produce electricity for the utility like normal, full stop. But once the grid is full, or once the price is too low, it's very low for electricity, it switches in milliseconds to the electrolysis and then is producing hydrogen that can be or put into cylinders and be brought to a fueling station, or is fueled in directly into the gas grid. So it's really power to gas at its best, and I would wish many more people would just have a look at it and see how this works in practice. And these installations, also the reactivity of an electrolyzer in milliseconds, it's, by the way, it's the PEM electrolysis, but that's just for the engineers in the room. This is something that should be very, very close to the source. Have a look at TenneT. I think they have it on the website, and the tool is great. So you can calculate and you can see how it works. Thank you.
Dimitri, you want to comment, or anyone else?
Yes, indeed. And I wish I could give you a very confident answer, but I'm aware that the issue is very highly complex, and we do identify that the location of electrolyzers or any power to X equipment is critical, and it depends on many things. And the appropriate locations for large-scale development of electrolyzers are not so many in Europe. You mentioned the consumers, the production, the storage, there's the transport. What is the objective? The objective is to minimize the cost for the consumers in the end. And it's not a simple equation, and there is not one fit all, let's say, answer that we can give there. So it's a critical thing. It also depends on how the electrolyzers are going to be operating. What is their pattern? I mean, we don't know that. We need to learn more. We need to learn more to make the right investments.
Morten, you wanted
can
to
I
say?
just?
Yeah, sure.
Can I just add just one minor comment adding to what Jorgo said, that we see in my country also the addition of district heating to this in order to further integrate along sectors. So we'll be seeing some actual tests on this, or large scale implementations where you also integrate the district heating in order to further have the sector coupling going ahead and maximizing use of renewables also in that context. Thanks.
Thank you. So I see the time is going over. We are coming close to the conclusion of the event. So maybe I will pass the floor to Timothée for having the few final words of conclusion. I would like to thank a lot the panelists for their interaction and their direct feedback into this very complex question. And I think this was a very interesting debate. So thanks to all of you for that. And Timothée, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. And yeah, I would like to second what you just said. Thanks a lot to all the speakers and all the questions. Also, I think we were not able to answer all of them, but I think that they are very interesting. We saved them, and we will also consider all those questions in our further work on the vision. Just to say a few words on the concluding remarks, if you want, for this webinar. I think that what we should take away from this webinar, that was really an introduction, is that the vision is exploring pathways to reconcile political objectives and technical reality. So our goal as TSOs is really we have these political objectives which will be agreed upon, and how we make them feasible technically. And this is a difficult question, as we can see. But we see at least a clear need for a system of interconnected system, which will be at the center of the ongoing transformation. This is really a precondition for the successful integration of large-scale renewables into the power grid, and also to the achievement of climate neutrality objectives. Then, of course, also the different layers, the different system operators, and so on, that will have a key role to integrate the transition. And the question is really how we achieve all that. And we have this multi-layer, multiplayer, cross-sector, cross-border coordination, cooperation, and integration. So that's a lot of words next to another, but I think it's really showing that there is a need to coordinate within the electricity system and even further. I take also away from the discussion the need to really focus also on consumer even more. The fact that the role of the hydrogen is a critical one, and also that it's a major topic for discussion in the current political framework. I really hope also that the 10-year vision will help to improve the development of infrastructure that are needed. And in general, I invite you to prolong the debate by joining the other webinars this week. Maybe we can just go to the next slide where we can see all the webinars. Thank you. So the first one is main trends and drivers, but that's just the one we just did now. This afternoon from 2 to 4, we will discuss the market design options for the future. The idea will be to see how market and operation can work closer together. Tomorrow, so Tuesday, in the morning from 10 to 12, we will discuss the potential of flexibilities and how the system will adapt to and rely on the distributed flexibilities. In the afternoon from 2 to 4, we will dive into two of the big topics on the EU agenda, which are system integration and offshore renewable development. And then on Wednesday, in the morning, we will discuss how innovation can support a system with hybrid AC/DC networks and new operational challenges linked to this. And in the afternoon, we will conclude this Vision Week with a wrap-up of a wrap-up webinar, which will put all pieces together from 2 to 4, and where we will conclude also on the next steps. So I would like to thank you all for your participation. I really look forward to the results of the exchange in the coming days, and yeah, I wish you all bon appétit and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye to everyone.